Okay, you guys, just in the short amount of time that I've been out here doing this, putting the water into that pan, the dye has what looks like fully exhausted now. When I look down into my pot, I don't see any gold, residual gold color left in the water. I'm gonna go ahead and show you now. So you can see the water is now clear. And that's awesome. The water really doesn't feel, I mean, it's warm, but it doesn't feel crazy hot. But I definitely think there was enough heat in there and citric acid to, you know, help the dye absorb into the yarn. Some might even argue that it was mostly the citric acid that did it. But hey, you know, we tried. We're trying something new here. But there is no more dye in that water. You can see that it is clear. So that's great. So now we can move on to the step 2 of this experiment and see if we can't steam set some speckles on that yarn. I have my water in my pan over here. It's gonna sit out here for a second by itself and let it get really nice and hot and steamy in there to create a really good steamy environment for the speckles. Let's go ahead and check the temperature. Okay. I'm convinced that this thing doesn't really work accurately on a shiny surface, and so I think I might have a better idea. Okay, so I think that in order to get an accurate temperature reading when you're working with a shiny surface like this, you have to get really close. If you get too far out, you're getting a lot of reflection, I believe. This is this is an assumption, so don't take me at, you know, too seriously. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick it really close. I'm not touching the surface, but I'm getting really close. That seems to me to be more accurate, 112. So, you know, when I touch this, like, I don't want to touch it for very long because it's really hot. So yeah, that seems a little bit more accurate. If I actually touch the surface with this, yeah, that seems accurate. And same thing if I come over here, like the lid of this is far less hot than the metal. Yeah, that seems much more accurate. So we're working with the lid. I just brought this outside and the lid is already at 116. So it's gonna get pretty steamy in there pretty quickly. Okay, so a couple of things that I get now. So we definitely didn't challenge this experiment very much because we didn't use a very heavy dye stock. It wasn't super saturated with color. That's okay. I didn't want it to become I didn't want to have a ton left over, I guess you could say. I wanted some success, but I definitely wanted it to work because of the heat and not necessarily because of the citric acid. But, you know, the two go together. So I'm definitely thinking it was a combination of both those things that helped to absorb all of the dye. I'm really confident though about steam setting the speckles because that pan was already super hot as soon as I brought it out into the sun, and so I'm thinking it's going to get really good and hot in there and perfect environment for throwing some speckles on this and having them set. So that's what I'm going to try next. I'm going to go ahead and take this guy and lay him out in the pan so he gets nice and hot as well, because the yarn surface, the surface of the yarn definitely needs to be hot in order for speckles to set, as well as the outside environment. So let's see what we can do. Okay, so after further consideration about this whole situation, especially because now I'm going to be trying to speckle this and I really want it to work, and also because I think I got off easy with the first experiment, I want to change the location of where I have that pan right now. Now that pan is actually in the front of the house. The front of the house receives direct sunlight later in the day, whereas the rear of the house receives direct sunlight. And in this particular place I'm going to show you, receives direct sunlight all day from very early in the morning. And I'm also going to show you something interesting too about the different surfaces where I could be placing this to impact how hot the water gets. So this area that I'm in right now is in a spot that always has sunlight on it. And so I'm going to try this spot, and we're in the backyard as well, for speckling the yarn. Okay, so below me here, we have the landscaping rocks in our backyard, and we also have right over here that walkway surface that I was talking about earlier. Now here's the difference, the variation, and a couple things that I've noticed here. I could come over here and I could put the pan over here in these rocks, which are always in the sun, but they're right next to the grass. And one thing that we learn about grass is that it's like a cooling mechanism. It keeps things cool. So if I'm checking the temperature of the rocks right here, It's 139 right here. Obviously the grass is going to be considerably cooler, drops in temperature by 39 degrees, actually even more than that. See, so the grass is super cool. And then the rocks right here, 138, 137 right here. Now the further away from the grass I get, the hotter those rocks are going to get because they don't have that cooling source. I'm going to keep going this way and I'm going to get closer and closer, or actually, excuse me, I'm going to get further and further away from those rocks. And I find that right here where I'm standing, I can move the thermometer around. I get 152, 54, 148. Okay, so right in this area, I'm actually at a temperature that is hotter than the blacktop that I checked earlier out on the street. But watch this. I'm gonna walk over here. Here's the rocks. I'm on the rocks. I'm on the concrete. I'm on the rocks. I'm on the concrete. The concrete is considerably cooler than the rocks, and so trying to do this on the concrete is not the right option if I have these rocks. So I am going to bring my pan over to this spot right here that's now peaking at 159, and we're gonna try it there. Okay, one thing I want to check before I leave it there to warm up is I want to see the difference, excuse the noise, I want to see the difference in the yarn temperature between the two different places. So I have the yarn in the pan right now sitting on that walkway. I'm going to see the temperature of the yarn now, and then I'm going to put it on the rocks, let it sit for 15 minutes, come back and check the temperature on the rocks and see how much of a difference we have. Okay, so this is the temperature of the yarn now. I'm gonna get kind of close because we're working with a shiny surface here. Okay, we're at 199 degrees. Okay, so it's pretty cool in there right now. I'm gonna go ahead and transfer the yarn over to these super crazy hot rocks, and we'll see how fast it heats up. All right, let's go ahead and check the initial temperature of the pan's surface now in this spot. All right, that's a lot hotter than it was over on the walkway. It's been 15 minutes and I'm gonna go ahead and check the temperature. I am anticipating that it is not much hotter than it was before. I have a plan if that's the case because I really want to get this to the right temperature. I'm looking for the water in the pan to be hot enough that when I touch it, it feels like hot bath water, like bath water that's too hot, as opposed to just like tepid water, which is what it is right now. I do have a plan if this isn't where it should be, and it might be a little crazy and I might be taking this over the top, but I'm doing it anyway. So let's go ahead and check it out and see what we have. Okay, the current temperature on top of the pan, gotta get close, is 128 degrees right now. So that's 125. If I go to the center here where it dips down lower into the pan, I guess it's not much different. But it looks like we're peaking at 126 right now. Okay, so the temperature on top of the pan is 126. The temperature of these rocks is still, you know, we're looking at 145, 148, 148. Over here we've got 143, but they're super hot, the rocks surrounding the pan. But the pan itself is staying around 126 right here. Okay, let's go ahead and take the lid off. Ouch, it is definitely hot to the touch. Okay, the water, I'm gonna get really close. 102. 102 is like maybe what like a resort jacuzzi would be set at. They usually have their jacuzzi set really high. And the further I pull this away, the cooler it gets, obviously. But if I get close, it's at 100. Oh, that's 98. 105 right over in this corner. That's interesting. Okay, so definitely needs to get a little warmer in here. Now, it's not where it should be, and so this is what I'm thinking. Okay, bear with me. And I'm actually gonna walk over here in the shade of this umbrella because I'm super duper hot. There. Gotta love a good umbrella. Okay, so this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that if I take some of those rocks that are on the ground around the pan and I put them on top of the pan, then they're gonna attract the heat. They're gonna, you know, become super hot on top of the pan and kind of heat from the top instead of reflecting all of that heat away. Because I mean, you kind of imagine too, like if you're wearing a black shirt outside in the sun, the black absorbs the heat and makes you very hot. If you're wearing white, it reflects the heat and makes you cooler, or keeps you cooler, I should say. I think what's happening now, obviously, is that the surface is reflective. It's reflecting the heat away, so it's not getting as hot as it needs to get in order to heat the water inside. And also too, the rocks that are underneath the pan are now covered, so what was originally heating those rocks is now being covered, so they're not staying as hot. So I'm going to put some of those rocks on top and see if that doesn't get the inside temperature, if that doesn't increase the inside temperature. So I know that sounds crazy, and I would never do this to dye yarn regularly, no matter how eco-friendly I'm trying to be. This is just an experiment to see if it'll work, and I'm pulling out all the stops for this one for you guys, for science. Okay, let's check the temperature of these rocks. Some might say I'm having too much fun with this thing. Yep, 142, 145. All right, let's leave it for 15 minutes and see what we got. Okay, so it's been plenty of time. Let's go ahead and check the temperature of our situation we have down here. Okay, so on top of the pan, the temperature is 149, 155, 150, oh, I saw 157 in there, 156. Okay, so it's super hot on top. The area around the pan, 151. Now I get that, like, this is clearly not nearly as hot as a burner would get, like, I totally get that, but one thing I do know is that you don't always require, or you don't always need that kind of intense heat to exhaust small amounts of dye. So, and we kind of have learned that with our first trial, so I'm gonna go ahead and pull this off like this. We're gonna check the temperature inside. Okay, we're looking at 108. If I do just like the ambient temperature, meaning I just kind of shoot inside like this, we're at I don't know if you can see that, but it's topped out at 111. So the ambient temperature inside the pan is 112, I see right there, but the temperature of the water itself is 106 right here. Okay, so I'm only planning on speckling it very lightly. I'm not gonna do any heavy speckling or anything like that. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna test it with the temperature that we're having it, that it's at right now. We have that ambient temperature of what's topping out at 112, and then we have the temperature of what the water is and the yarn is at 106, plus the outside temperature around is in the 150. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the lid off, leave it here. I'm gonna take the pan into the dyeing studio, give it a light speckling, bring it back out, put the lid back on, leave it, and we're gonna see how long it takes for those speckles to become fixed to the yarn where they don't rub off. And then the final test is to then rinse the yarn in clear, clean water and see if we have any bleeding of color. And if we don't have any bleeding of color, then we have successfully dyed and speckled yarn using only solar power and heat energy. So let's go ahead and give it a speckle and then see what happens. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and now move the pan back to our heating position out in the backyard. It's definitely gonna require me to walk very slowly because I don't want the dye to move around too much. I want it to speckle the yarn, so I'm gonna have to do this very, very slowly. But I'm gonna get it back there, put the lid on it, and we're gonna let it set, so wish me luck. Alright guys, it's been about 25 minutes. I'm somewhat impatient. I want to go out and test and see if the speckles have adhered to the yarn, and in order to do that I have brought with me a cotton swab, because this way it'll make it obvious if any of the dye comes off. Sometimes when I'm using like my glove, it's not very clear if the dye is coming off on my glove or if it's just stuff on my glove. Who knows? We're using a cotton swab because it's science. And I'm also bringing the infrared thermometer with me because you know how much I love playing with that right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and check the temperature outside. Okay, we're looking at 154, 153. You can kind of see the variations in temperature here. I'm going to go ahead and pull this lid off of the yarn. Ta-da! Alright, beautiful speckles. I'm loving those speckles. I used kind of like a mossy green speckle over this. Let's go ahead and check. You know what, I'm actually going to leave the lid partially on so we can get an idea of what the ambient, oops, don't want rocks on the iron, so we can get an idea of what the ambient temperature inside may have been. So I'm going to check the ambient temperature underneath there. And that is reading 103. It's not too high, but I did just open it. The water itself is only 96 degrees, so the water itself is cooling down, but let's still test the speckles because that's what really matters. So Q-tip test on the speckles. I'm gonna try and find a place that's pretty heavily saturated with dye to test. So looking around, I see right here, we have an area right here, so I'm gonna go ahead and give it a swab, stick the Q-tip in there, move it all around. I don't see any dye coming off of the yarn. And look at that, you guys. That is a clean Q-tip. Let's check it in a couple other places. Really rub it around on the yarn. Yeah, I think we have success, you guys. I think we have yarn speckled and dyed using no electricity. All right, let's go ahead and rinse it and see what happens. Okay, so I have the pan here, and I have the water. Obviously, I haven't drained out any of the water, and I'm moving the skein of yarn around, and I'm not getting any bleed of dye into the water. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you. Okay, so here's our pan, here's our yarn. I can move the yarn around in the pan. I'm squeezing out the water and I'm not getting any dye bleeding out into the water here. So I'm gonna go ahead and take the yarn now and stick it into a bucket with a little bit of mild dish soap. What I use whenever I have heavily speckled yarn, I tend to use this dish soap after speckling just to remove any residual dye. It's plant-based, it's eco-friendly, it's really, really super gentle. So I like to use this. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick the yarn in some water with this stuff and see if we get any bleed or any residual dye going out into the water. If the water ends up being left clear, then we know we have success. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. Okay, so this is my bucket. There's some soap in there. Like I was showing you, I'm gonna go ahead and add the yarn. You can see just from how light the yarn is and how little dye we use today that we're probably not going to get any bleed of color in this case, but still I want to make sure that everything is set and that it's not going to just wash out of the yarn, which is very unlikely considering we use the two main things to fix dye to yarn, which is heat and acid. So I'm confident that this is fine. Now I am going to soak it in some Eucalyptus to soften the yarn, to add back some of that lanolin, and then we will spin it dry and see how we did. So this is what we have after soaking in Eucalyptus for 15 minutes. This is what residual dye would be left over. Now the water is, it's probably better if I show it to you here. So there's a white background back there. So you can see the water is virtually clear. There's no dye in any of the bubbles. You don't see anything there. It might have a slight tinge to it, but it's so faint that that doesn't even doesn't even matter. The water is pretty much clear. And so I'm super excited about that because that means that we were able to successfully dye yarn and slightly speckle yarn using just the power of the sun and the ambient heat outside. So I think that was a pretty successful experiment. Thank you for hanging in with me while I did it. I know I got a little unconventional and maybe not, maybe it wasn't very accurate, but I don't know, let me know what you think. Comment down below. Until next time guys, have a good day. Bye.